She was nothing but a fragile human discarded in the snow by the very wolf destined to protect her. But when the cruelest alpha king in the realm knelt at her feet, the male who threw her away would drown in his own regret. This is Gwendolyn's vengeance. The great hall of the Winterbourne Pack was a cavern of rough-hewn stone, illuminated by roaring hearths and the greasy smoke of roasted meats. It was the night of the blood moon, the sacred medieval festival, where wolves found their fated mates. For Gwendolyn, it was supposed to be a night of hiding in the shadows. As a human ward, a polite term for a hostage taken from the fallen human estate of Lord Harrington, she had spent her 19 years surviving on the fringes of a brutal, predatory society. Gwendolyn was slight of build, with skin as pale as the snowdrifts outside, and hair the color of spun copper. She possessed none of the savage strength the Lycans worshipped. She was tolerated only because her family's ancient bloodline carried a long-forgotten treaty with the wolves of the north. Tonight, the heir to the Winterbourne Pack. Casey was to officially choose his Luna. Casey was a towering brute of a man, renowned for his ruthlessness on the battlefield and his striking, icy blue eyes. Every she-wolf in the pack lusted after him, but none more fiercely than Lady Morgan, a high-ranking warrior whose cruelty was matched only by her beauty. Gwendolyn stood near the kitchens, keeping her head down, carrying a heavy silver tray of mead. Suddenly, the chaotic din of the great hall fell silent. The heavy oak doors had blown open, and the scent of pine and crisp winter air rushed in. But underneath that, a different scent bloomed wild jasmine and rain. It was intoxicating. A collective gasp rippled through the hall as Casey, standing upon the raised dais, froze. His eyes completely dilated and glowing with the feral gold of his inner wolf locked onto the back of the room. He vaulted over the long wooden table landing with a heavy thud and began to stalk through the crowd. The pack parted for him like water. Gwendolyn's heart hammered against her ribs. She tried to step back to melt into the stone wall, but her legs refused to move. The scent of him, leather smoke, and intoxicating spice overwhelmed her senses. Her soul sang a single terrifying word, death. Casey stopped inches from her. The silence in the hall was deafening. He looked down at the trembling human girl, his chest heaving. The golden glow in his eyes warred with something darker, something twisted. Disgust. "You," he snarled, the word dripping with venom. "The fates would shackle me to a weak, fragile human, a creature that would shatter under the weight of my pups. A girl who cannot even bare her fangs to defend my borders." Gwendolyn's breath hitched. "Casey," she whispered, the mating bond already tearing at her chest, making her yearn to reach out and soothe him. "Do not speak my name with your blunt teeth," he barked, his voice echoing off the stone walls. Lady Morgan stepped out from the crowd, a cruel, triumphant smirk playing on her crimson lips. She wrapped a possessive arm around Casey's waist. "A jest of the moon goddess, my lord. A human Luna. The neighboring packs would slaughter us within a fortnight." Casey's jaw clenched. He looked at Gwendolyn, his eyes hardening into chips of glacial ice. "I, Casey of the Winterbourne Pack, reject you. Gwendolyn of the Harrington line as my mate. You are a stain on our strength, a vulnerability I will not abide. I sever this bond." The pain was instantaneous and catastrophic. It felt as though a serrated blade had been plunged into Gwendolyn's chest, twisting violently as the spiritual tether between them snapped. She dropped the silver tray. It clattered loudly against the cobblestone's mead, spilling like blood. Gwendolyn fell to her knees, clutching her heart, gasping for air that refused to fill her lungs. Casey did not flinch. He looked down at her writhing form with cold apathy. "Cast her out," He commanded his guards. A rejected mate will only breed madness in the pack. Throw her past the boundary lines. If the winter does not claim her, the wild beasts will. No, Gwendolen choked out, blood trickling from her nose as the rejection fever set in. Casey, please, I have nowhere to go. The frost. You are no longer my concern, human, he interrupted, turning his back on her to pull Morgan into a passionate kiss. The pack erupted into cheers, praising their alpha's ruthless devotion to strength over destiny. Rough hands grabbed Gwendolen by her arms. Tobias, a brutish guard with a scarred face, dragged her through the jeering crowd, out the heavy oak doors, and into the howling blizzard of the Ethelgard wilderness. They stripped her of her heavy woolen cloak, leaving her in a thin linen dress, and threw her into a snowdrift, past the iron gates of the territory. Keep walking, human, Tobias sneered. If you cross back, we have orders to tear you limb from limb. The gates slammed shut, the heavy iron bolt sliding into place with a terrifying finality. Gwendolen was alone. The cold was an immediate suffocating predator. It bit into her bare skin, numbing her fingers and toes within minutes. The rejection fever burned inside her chest, a cruel contrast to the freezing temperature outside. She dragged herself upright, shivering violently, tears freezing on her cheeks before they could even fall. She began to walk into the dark, towering pines, guided by nothing but the desperate primal instinct to survive. She would not die here. She would not let Casey's arrogance be her epitaph. But as the hours bled into the night, her strength waned. The snow was up to her knees, and the howling of wild timber wolves echoed through the ancient woods. Finally, her legs gave out. Gwendolen collapsed beneath the roots of a massive oak tree, the darkness encroaching on the edges of her vision. As she closed her eyes, ready to surrender to the endless sleep of the cold, she heard the heavy, rhythmic crunch of boots in the snow. Gwendolen's consciousness faded in and out, tethered to reality only by the agonizing burn in her chest and the freezing snow beneath her cheek. Through her half-lidded eyes, the world was a blur of white and shadow. Then the shadows moved. It was a hunting party. Massive figures draped in thick bear pelts and dark armor emerged from the blizzard. They were lichens, but not of the winterborn pack. Their armor bore the crest of a roaring wolf, wreathed in obsidian fire, the sigil of the Iron Claw dynasty, the royal bloodline that ruled the entirety of the northern realms. "Halt!" a voice boomed. It was a sound that seemed to vibrate the very ground beneath the snow, deep, resonant, and thrumming with an ancient, terrifying authority. The men parted, dropping to one knee in the snow despite the freezing conditions. From the rear of the party strode a man who looked more like a god of war than a mortal creature. He stood well over 6.5 feet tall, his broad shoulders easily dwarfing the massive warriors around him. This was King Valerian. Valerian was a legend whispered about in terrified tones by the hearth fires. He had ascended to the throne of Ethelgard by slaughtering the corrupt elders who murdered his father, cementing his rule with blood and iron. For a decade he had ruled without a Luna, his heart considered as impenetrable as the obsidian fortress he commanded. Valerian stopped abruptly. His massive frame tensed, and his head snapped toward the ancient oak tree where Gwendolen lay. "Sire," one of his guards ventured cautiously. Valerian ignored him. He inhaled sharply, his chest expanding beneath his dark leather armor. A scent had cut through the bitter frost and pine, a scent of wild jasmine rain and the metallic tang of fresh blood. His eyes, normally a dark, stormy gray, ignited into a blazing supernatural crimson, the color of an alpha king finding his soul. He closed the distance in 3 massive strides, dropping to his knees before her frozen form. When he reached out and touched her icy cheek, A jolt of pure, unadulterated electricity sparked between them. Gwendolen gasped weakly, her eyes fluttering open to meet the blazing crimson gaze of the most dangerous predator in the realm. "Mate." Valerian rumbled the word, tearing from his throat in a ragged, possessive growl. "She is human, Your Grace." His captain, a seasoned warrior named Cale, noted with visible shock. "And she bears the scent of the winter-born pack, and the stench of a severed bond. She has been rejected." A terrifying snarl erupted from Valerian, a sound so violent that the surrounding trees seemed to shake. The guards instinctively bared their throats in submission. "Rejected!" Valerian's voice was a deadly quiet hiss. "Who would dare throw away what the gods have gifted me?" He didn't wait for an answer. With surprising gentleness, Valerian scooped Gwendolen's fragile, freezing body into his massive arms. He pulled off his heavy, fur-lined royal cloak and wrapped it tightly around her, pressing her against his chest to share his burning body heat. "Hold on, my little bird," he whispered into her copper hair, his tone devoid of his usual cruelty. "You are safe now. You are mine." "Cold," Gwendolen mumbled deliriously, her small hands weakly clutching the lapels of his armor. "Ride," Valerian roared to his men, vaulting onto the back of his massive black warhorse, with Gwendolen cradled securely against him. "Send word to the Obsidian Keep, prepare the healers. If she perishes, I will flay every healer in the court alive." The journey to the Obsidian Keep was a blur to Gwendolen. She only knew the steady, thunderous beating of the king's heart against her ear, and the unnatural warmth radiating from his body, combating the rejection fever that threatened to stop her heart. When she finally awoke, she was no longer in the freezing snow, nor was she in the drafty, miserable servant quarters of the winterborn pack. Gwendolen opened her eyes to a ceiling painted with gold leaf and constellations. She was lying in a massive four-poster bed, swathed in silk sheets and thick, heated furs. A fire roared in a hearth large enough to roast an ox. The air smelled of frankincense and the lingering, comforting scent of leather and spice that belonged to the king. "You are awake." Gwendolen bolted upright, her heart hammering. Sitting in a high-backed velvet chair near the fire was King Valerian. He had shed his armor, wearing only a loose linen shirt that strained against his muscular chest and dark trousers. Without the snow and the darkness, he was devastatingly handsome, though a thin silver scar running over his left eye served as a reminder of his brutal nature. Where am I?" she asked, her voice raspy. "You are in my chambers at the Obsidian Keep." Valerian said, his voice softer than before, though it still carried the weight of absolute command. He stood and approached the bed. Gwendolen instinctively flinched, remembering Casey's cruelty. Valerian stopped immediately, a flash of genuine pain crossing his sharp features. "I will not harm you," he swore, his crimson eyes locking onto hers. "I would burn this entire kingdom to ash before I let a single hair on your head be harmed. You are my fated mate." Gwendolen swallowed hard tears welling in her eyes. "I am human. I am weak. I was rejected." Valerian knelt by the bed, taking her small, delicate hand in his large, calloused one. He brought her knuckles to his lips, pressing a reverent kiss against her skin. "You are not weak. You survived a rejection and the northern winter. And you are not merely human. You are my queen." The female meant to stand beside the king of Ethelgard, the wolf who rejected you. Valerian continued his voice, dropping an octave laced with a terrifying, homicidal promise. He was of the winterborn pack. Gwendolen nodded slowly. "Casey, the alpha heir." A dark, deadly smile curled Valerian's lips. It was a smile that promised absolute ruin. "The winter solstice is in 3 weeks," the king murmured, brushing a stray lock of copper hair from her face. "By ancient law, all Alpha heirs must attend the royal court to pledge their loyalty and present their chosen lunars to the king." Valerian's eyes glowed with a wicked possessive light. "We are going to dress you in the finest silks, crown you in jewels, and heal every scar he gave you. And when Casey of Winterbourne steps into my throne room to boast of his strength, he will find the very girl he threw away, sitting upon the throne, ruling over him." Gwendolen looked at the king, the fear slowly draining from her body, replaced by a spark of something she hadn't felt in years. Defiance. "Will you stand by me, Gwendolen?" Valerian asked, his thumb gently stroking her pulse point. She looked at the male who possessed the power to destroy realms, who was currently kneeling at her feet as if she were a goddess. "Yes," she whispered, her voice steady. "I will." The weeks leading up to the winter solstice were a whirlwind of absolute transformation for Gwendolen. Within the impenetrable stone walls of the obsidian keep, the fragile human girl who had been left to freeze in the wilderness was meticulously rebuilt both in body and spirit into a monarch. Under the fierce but fiercely protective care of King Valerian, Gwendolen's rejection, fever broke. The mating bond they shared was a living, breathing entity, a golden thread of warmth that constantly pulsed between them. Whenever the phantom pains of Casey's cruel severing flared in her chest, Valerian was there. The Alpha King, a warlord who had conquered the northern realms with merciless precision, would abandon his council meetings just to sit by her side, holding her hand until the supernatural agony subsided. Valerian refused to let her hide. He recognized that her human bloodline was not a weakness, but a profound historical anchor. Gwendolen was the last living descendant of the Harrington York estate, tracing her lineage directly back to Lord William Cavendish, the original human ambassador who had brokered the first peace with the Lycans centuries ago. This real documented private lineage made her claim to the throne unassailable in the eyes of the ancient laws, a fact that Valerian weaponized against his political detractors. To solidify her standing before the solstice, Valerian issued a formal decree that echoed across the snow-covered mountains of Ethelgard, the royal edict of the obsidian throne. "Let it be known to all alphas, betas, and omegas of the realm. The era of the solitary king has ended. The moon goddess has bestowed upon the Iron Claw dynasty its fated Luna. She carries the blood of the Cavendish-Harrington line, the architects of our oldest peace. Any disrespect shown to the Luna Queen will be treated as high treason against the crown, punishable by immediate execution." The court was initially stunned by the presence of a human mate, but Gwendolen quickly earned their reverence. She was not a warrior who swung a broadsword, but she possessed a sharp, strategic mind that had been honed by years of silent observation while enslaved in the Winterbourne kitchens. To prepare for her debut at the Solstice Court, the finest artisans and scholars in the kingdom were summoned to the keep. The hierarchy of the Solstice Court, Gwendolen had to memorize the shifting power dynamics of the pacts that would attend. The realm was deeply fractured beneath the surface, and knowing her enemies was her greatest shield. As the solstice approached, the king's devotion only grew more intense. The mating bond had fully synchronized their emotions. When Gwendolen felt a flicker of anxiety, Valerian's eyes would bleed into that terrifying, protective crimson. He showered her with gifts, ensuring that when she stepped into the great hall, no one would dare question her supremacy. Her royal attire was crafted to be a visual weapon designed to strike fear and awe into the hearts of those who had wronged her. On the evening of the solstice, her handmaidens dressed her in a manner befitting a goddess of winter, the gown. a masterpiece of midnight blue velvet woven with silver thread that mapped the constellations of the winter sky. The armor. A delicate articulated corset of polished obsidian scales mirroring the king's battle armor, symbolizing that she was under his ultimate lethal protection. The crowned, out-jagged halo of pure silver, embedded with sapphires the size of robin's eggs, resting heavily against her braided copper hair. Valerian entered her chambers as the final adjustments were made. He was adorned in his formal royal leathers, a heavy black fur cape draped over his broad shoulders. When his gaze fell upon Gwendolen, he stopped dead in his tracks. The feral possessive rumble that vibrated from his chest made the handmaidens quickly bow and scurry from the room. "You are a vision, my little bird." Valerian murmured his voice, thick with unbridled emotion. He crossed the room and gently cupped her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "The realm will fall to its knees tonight, and the fool who discarded you will finally understand the magnitude of his mistake." Gwendolen looked up into his stormy grey eyes, feeling a surge of profound confidence. She was no longer the shivering, broken girl in the snow. She was the Lunar Queen of Ethelgard. "Let them come," Gwendolen whispered, a sharp, dangerous smile curving her lips. "I am ready." The great hall of the Obsidian Keep was a spectacle of terrifying grandeur. Thousands of candles floated in iron chandeliers suspended from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm, flickering glow over the polished black marble floors. Long tables groaned under the weight of an extravagant feast. Every alpha, beta, and high-ranking warrior from the four corners of the kingdom had gathered. The air was thick with the scent of roasted venison, spiced wine, and the overpowering pheromones of hundreds of dominant lichens trying to assert their presence. At the far end of the cavernous hall, atop a raised dais of solid black stone, sat the obsidian throne. Currently the throne was empty. The king had not yet made his entrance, and the tension in the room was palpable. Near the front of the crowd stood Casey of the Winterborn pack. He wore a tunic of stark white fur and silver chainmail, his chest puffed out with arrogant pride. Clinging to his arm was Lady Morgan, adorned in scandalous crimson silk, a smug smirk plastered across her beautiful, cruel face. "Look at this ostentatious display," Casey sneered quietly to his beta. "King Valerian grows soft, focusing on festivals and rumors of a mate. Once I am officially recognized as Alpha of Winterborn tonight, we will begin pushing our borders. The king's time is coming to an end." Morgan giggled, trailing a clawed finger down Casey's chest. "And I shall be the most powerful lunar in the north, unlike that pathetic weeping human you threw to the wolves. I wonder if the scavengers even left her bones." Casey barked a harsh laugh. "Gwendolen was a parasite. Searing her from my soul was the most liberating pain I have ever felt. A true alpha requires a warrior, not a fragile maid." Suddenly, the deafening blast of ceremonial war horns shattered the chatter. The massive iron doors at the side of the dais swung open, and the royal guards, clad in full plate armor, marched out in perfect, terrifying unison. They slammed the butts of their halberds against the marble floor, the sound ringing out like thunder. Silence for His Grace Valerian of the Iron Claw dynasty, King of Ethelgard, and his fated mate, the Lunar Queen. The herald roared, his magically amplified voice shaking the goblets on the tables. The entire hall dropped to one knee, heads bowed in absolute submission. Even Casey gritted his teeth and knelt, pulling Morgan down with him. King Valerian strode onto the dais. His presence alone was suffocating, a suffocating aura of pure, concentrated alpha power that forced the breath from the lungs of every wolf in the room. But he was not alone. Walking beside him, her small hand resting regally upon his massive forearm, was a woman whose face was concealed behind a shimmering veil of silver mesh attached to her crown. Valerian guided her to the throne, seating her first, before taking his place beside her. "Rise." The king commanded, his voice a low, lethal rumble that carried effortlessly to the back of the hall. The crowd stood, their eyes instantly drawn to the mysterious queen. "We are gathered to renew the blood oaths of the realm." Valerian began, his crimson eyes scanning the crowd like a predator evaluating its prey. "But first, we acknowledge the blessings of the moon goddess. I have found my soul. I have found my queen." Valerian reached over and delicately lifted the silver veil from Gwendolen's face, tossing it aside. A collective gasp echoed through the great hall. Down in the front row, Casey's face drained of all color. His icy blue eyes widened in a look of absolute, unadulterated horror. His jaw dropped, and he staggered back a step, as if he had been physically struck by a battering ram. It was Gwendolen. The pale, fragile human he had condemned to a freezing death was sitting upon the most powerful throne in the known world. She was radiant, her copper hair gleaming under the candlelight, her posture straight and dripping with aristocratic authority. And she was looking directly at him. But it wasn't just shock that hit Casey. It was a violent, sickening revelation from his inner wolf. In that split second, the moon goddess's curse for breaking a fated bond slammed into him. His wolf recognized the scent of the queen, wild jasmine and rain, and realized the catastrophic magnitude of what he had thrown away. Morgan suddenly smelled like ash and rot to him. The realization that he had sacrificed an ancient royal bloodline for a cruel, barren warrior shattered his sanity. "No." Casey choked out his voice, trembling, breaking the solemn silence of the court. "No, it cannot be. Gwendolen." Valerian's eyes snapped to Casey, glowing with the fires of hell. "You dare speak to the Lunar Queen without permission, whelp of Winterborn?" Casey fell to his knees, ignoring the gasps of his pack members and the horrified screech of Morgan. The regret was a physical agony, tearing at his insides far worse than the rejection fever he had inflicted upon Gwendolen. He crawled forward, past the velvet ropes, stopping only when the royal guards crossed their halberds at his throat. "Gwendolen, please." Casey begged, tears of profound, pathetic desperation streaming down his face. "I was blinded. I was wrong. The bond, I feel it. My wolf is dying without you. You are my true mate. Please forgive me. Come back to the Winterborn." The sound that erupted from Valerian was not a growl. It was the roar of a monstrous beast. The king stood his chair, splintering backward. The sheer force of his killing intent forced every wolf in the room, including Casey, to flatten themselves against the marble floor, whining in sheer terror. Valerian descended the steps of the dais, drawing a massive, rune-carved broadsword from his hip. "You discarded my queen like trash." Valerian snarled the blade, resting against the back of Casey's neck. "And now you dare to beg for her in my hall. I will mount your head on the gates of Winterborn." "Valerian, stop." Gwendolen's voice was calm, yet it sliced through the deafening tension of the room like a silver blade. Valerian froze. He looked back at his mate, his chest heaving, the monstrous anger warring with his absolute devotion to her voice. Slowly he lowered the sword, but kept his foot firmly planted on Casey's back. Gwendolen stood and descended the steps, her midnight blue velvet gown trailing behind her. She stopped inches from Casey's face. He looked up at her, his face stained with tears and snot, a pathetic shadow of the arrogant alpha he pretended to be. "Gwendolen, my love," he whimpered. "Do not speak to me," Gwendolen said coldly. "You rejected me because I was human. Because I was weak. You cast me into the frost to die, so you could rule with a monster. She gestured dismissively toward a trembling Morgan. Gwendolen knelt slightly, making sure only Casey could see the absolute zero in her eyes. You are not an alpha, Casey. You are a coward, and I am not your mate. I am your queen, and for your crimes against the crown, the Winterborn Pack is hereby stripped of its autonomy. You will serve as a foot soldier on the barren northern wall for the rest of your miserable, pathetic life. If you attempt to flee, my king will hunt you down. She stood up, turning her back on him completely. She reached out her hand to Valerian. The king smiled a dark, beautifully terrifying smile and took her hand, leading her back to the obsidian throne. Casey screamed in agony as the guards dragged him away, his howls of regret echoing into the freezing night, a song of sorrow that Gwendolen would never have to listen to again. Did Gwendolen's ultimate revenge give you chills? The Winterborn Pack learned the hard way that throwing away a diamond only leaves you with empty hands. If you loved this tale of betrayal, fated mates, and the ultimate royal redemption, please hit that like button, share this story with your fellow fantasy romance lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more epic werewolf drama. Drop a comment below on what you want to see next, and ring the bell.